Hello fellow viewers, welcome back. This is Pike and Shot Total War version 0.7. The version was released in January 28, 2023. And here we're going to see a lot of interesting stuff that have changed. There have been in this version tweaks in portraits, tweaks in population, income. So we're going to go along with in the same order that I used for my previous factions and starting positions video about this excellent mod. So that way is going to be more easy to understand what have changed. And then we can have that in comparison. I would like to greet Danilo, the mod creator, because we all simply love his effort and personally appreciate the possibility to enjoy this time period in a Total War game. So a lot of success in his development now in Shogun 2. So let's get on with it, and we can see at first glance that a lot of good stuff have happened. Portraits and the flags. Now, let me tell you, the flags here are completely handsome. So let's begin with Brandenburg Prussia. Of course, we can see the new guy. So eventually we have the world domination and the historical victory conditions. The last turn is late December 1648. Now it says 1848, of course, but there's an explanation in this other video, if you haven't seen that, about the reason the mod creator has done this. When you download the actual file, there's a README inside in which you can have an explanation. So we begin with Brandenburg Prussia. So this is the Electorate of Prussia, and there we go. Let's go to it. So to begin with, here in Berlin, we're going to have a look here at the city, and we see straight that the income has been elevated a little bit, and not too much, but it's a little bit more from the last version. And of course the Protestantism is now going up, which is more realistic. Into the government, we see that we still are an absolute monarchy. The monarch is Joachim III. Now, an interesting point here about this character: the actual electorate of Prussia in this time period is John Sigismund, was electorate from 1608 to 1619. Now, this electorate that is apparently not here is the son of Joachim III. This is actually Joachim III Frederick Hohenzollern. So these are guys from the house of Hohenzollern. Right off the bat, we can see that there are portraits, and this is one of those that have been changed. And let me tell you, this looks simply beautiful. The population has been increased, not too much, but a little bit in comparison with the other version. If we go and see here, we see a couple of agents and no armies, just to take that into account. For the next one, we're going to go straight to the Kingdom of France. We're going to have here a look at the victory conditions for both world domination and historical. So for the Kingdom of France, we see a decrease in the income or Paris, and we can see as well an increase in Catholicism. If we go here, we see that this is an absolute monarchy. The monarch is Louis XIII. Louis XIII, we see a beautiful portrait of the monarch of France. And in terms of population, I can tell you that has been decreased. In other things, we see a couple of armies. One army down here that is commanded by François de Bassompierre, and over here we see another one that is commanded by Urbain de Pérezé. Continuing, we go for the Tsardom of Russia, historical victory conditions, you can see over here, and for world domination, we can see those. And moving on to Moscow, we continue with the damaged buildings that you can see. We have a cannon foundry, a military camp, and a governor's residence that are already damaged. We can see that the income has been increased a little bit. In terms of the monarch, we have an absolute monarchy with Mikhail Fyodorowicz Romanov. Then we get a little bit more of population in comparison with the last version. And eventually we are Orthodox with 100%. In terms of military might, we have some units over here. We can see Dmitry over here. We can see down here another guy, Trubetskoy, and over here we see Mikhail Shane. For the Habsburg Monarchy, we have historical of 20 regions and the world domination here, where you can see that it increased the amount of regions that we have to take. So now in Vienna, Austria, we're going to see that the income has been decreased. Now, the decrease has been done slightly. We have 100% Catholicism. Over here, we still see the absolutism, and we see the Emperor Habsburg Matthias. We can note here that the population has been increased dramatically in this instance. Talking about generals, we have interesting commanders here. We can see Albert Wallenstein, which is a historical character, and we see a beautiful portrait of him. We see as well here Charles Bonaventure de Longueval. Another guy here, Gottfried Pappenheim, and we see the infamous Johann Tilly. Okay, for the Principality of Transylvania, we still have... We see historical victory conditions and world domination. Let's zoom in and let's check out the Gyula Fehérvár Transylvania. In Gyula Fehérvár Transylvania, we have 472 income with an increase in Protestantism of 3.3%, increase in Catholicism, and a decrease in Orthodox. We can still see an absolute monarchy with Bethlehem Gabor as the ruler, and we can see a beautiful portrait of this character. As well, we can see a population over here that has been decreased from the previous version. In terms of military, we see no armies and no agents. Now let's move north to Germany with the Electorate of Saxony. Historical victory conditions and world domination victory conditions. Now let's have a look at the Electorate of Saxony. At first glance, we can see that the flag, and this is something that I noted, this is the only faction that has a bug with the flag. The other thing is that if we remember in the other version, most of the electorates of the Holy Roman Empire were not accurately portrayed. We can see that there has been almost no change in the actual income, but now there is an increase in Protestantism in comparison with the previous version. Now, talking about the monarch, which is actually the Electorate of Saxony, we see Johann Georg I. This guy is accurate. So in terms of population, we can see basically the same population that we had in the previous version. And we have Sigismund as a commander general here, but it's actually a generic one. No agents and obviously no fleets. Now let's go to the Netherlands. We already know that this is called the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. Historical and world domination victory conditions. So let's go straight to Amsterdam here, and we can see a beautiful change in the actual flag. I really love this iteration of the Netherlands flag over here. We're going to have a look here, and we see a slightly small decrease in the income. In the other hand, we have an increase in Protestantism, with which we have 95%. In the other version, the Protestantism was, if I remember correctly, decreasing. For the government, we have Mauritius von Nassau, and eventually we have a completely different type of government. This is a republic. The population has been decreased slightly, and then we see a beautiful portrait of Mauritius von Nassau over here. Eventually, in terms of commanders, we see just Mauritius von Nassau, and we see the fleet, which is commanded by Piet Hein. Now let's go to one of the most important factions, which is the faction of the Kingdom of Sweden. We can already see that the flag has been changed. This is another great addition here. Historical victory conditions over here and world domination victory conditions. Let's go to Sweden, Stockholm. Now here in Stockholm, we can see that the income is basically the same. We have a static Protestantism. Sadly, the flag has been just changed in the actual faction selection screen. We can see that the portrait of the monarch has been updated, and it looks pretty awesome. We all know that is Gustavus II Adolphus. Obviously, we are talking here about a government absolute monarchy. And eventually, we can see that the population has been bumped up a little bit. Then we see a couple of generic commanders here. Fleets we don't have, and we have just one agent in this faction. Now let's go to the Mediterranean, to the most serene Republic of Venice. Historical and world domination victory conditions. Okay, let's check out Venetia, but before continuing, I would like to tell you, if you are enjoying my content, if you like to know about mods, about Total War, wargaming in general, give a like to the video, share the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. So continuing here with Venetia, we can see eventually the income has been decreased so slightly, and we have a static Catholicism, evidently. Over here we see the government type as a republic, and here we see the portrait of the actual Dutch. It is called here minister, but historically they were called Dutches, and this guy is Camillo Massanti. Now, I'm going to make a note here, a historical note. The actual Dutch of Venice in this time period, which was the Dutch from 1615 to 1618, was actually Giovanni Bembo. Over here we see a considerable decrease in population in comparison with the last version. In terms of armies, we don't see a fleet, which is actually a little bit strange, to be honest. And then here we see no agents as well. Something new happened here instead of Brunswick, because actually we can see Brunswick in game, but we can no longer select Brunswick-Lunenburg as a faction. Instead, we have the option to select the Swiss Confederation. So this is the historical victory conditions down here for the Swiss Confederation and world domination for this faction. Let's figure out what we have with this faction. Now, right straight into the Alps, we can see the flag of the Swiss. The region is Luzerne, Switzerland. That's the starting position. We can see that we have small amount of income here. Protestantism is 90% and is going up. And here we have an absolute monarchy as the government, and we have Philippe I as the monarch. We can see here that the population is 56,000. In terms of armies, we don't have. Fleets, obviously no, and virtually no agents. Now let's go to the Electorate, or rather the Duchy of Wurttemberg. The game mode historical and world domination. So now here in Stuttgart, we can see that there's actually no change in income. The Protestantism is now, instead of going down, is going up. And so there has been a interesting attention in the fact that Protestantism should be going up in the HRE, most likely. Over here we see an absolute monarchy, and eventually we see a decrease in population. In terms of the monarch, there's no actual portrait. The name of the monarch here is Johann Frederick von Wurttemberg. Now, to be more exact, the historical monarch is Louis Frederick von Wurttemberg. With that, we can now go to see the actual armies that we have. We have a small army down inside the actual city and no agents. Now to Scandinavia, we go to Denmark-Norway. Historical victory conditions down here, and world domination. Straight into Copenhagen, we have 100% Protestant. We have slightly the same amount of income. Now let's go and check here. There's no portrait for Christian. Obviously, Christian the Fourth of Denmark is accurate. We see the population has been increased. In terms of armies, we see a couple of armies, very small. We see one fleet and no agents. Let's go to the Duchy of Bavaria, historical victory conditions and world domination. Let's go ahead and check Munich. So in Munich we have the same amount of income. We have no changes in the situation about the religion. Obviously, we have 95% Catholicism and going up. In terms of government, we have the absolute monarchy system, and we have Maximilian I. Even though there is no portrait, Maximilian I was actually the monarch. We see a decrease in population. Down here we see a slightly standard army and no agents. Now the Crimean Khanate, we can see that here we have a portrait that is not exactly for the region. We have historical victory conditions and world domination as always. So right off the bat here in the area of Hadjibey, Little Tatary, the first thing we can see is evidently a change on the flag. So in comparison, we have the same. There has been no changes here in either in income and the religion. If we go here, we can see that we have an absolute monarchy. Kerim I is the Khan, and eventually the population, which is the most important feature here that has been changed, has been halved. We don't have armies, so we will have to recruit them. No fleets and no agents. So now it's the turn for the Duchy of the Courland and Semigalia. We have the historical game mode victory conditions and the world domination as it is typical for the mod. Now Courland, we already see that there has been a change on the flag. The flag is different. And in the starting position, which is Mitau, if we look at here, we see that this area is slightly increased in Protestantism by 2% actually, and the Protestantism is static. There has been no change in the actual income, and obviously if we go here we see the government as an absolute monarchy, and it is here Peter I, and we see a portrait of the actual Habsburg Emperor Matthias. The Courland is one of those regions that have been not given a lot of love. However, the historical governor of this area would be Friedrich Kettler or Friedrich Kettlers. Evidently no armies, we will have to recruit, no fleets and no agents. Now it's time to get into a more interesting faction, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Here we have historical game mode and victory conditions and the world domination victory conditions. Let's go to the map. So in Warsaw, Poland, we see an income of basically the same as the previous version. Something interesting to note in here is that in the previous version, the Catholicism was going down and it was considerably less than the 100% static that we see here. Over here we see as well that we have a constitutional monarchy, which is the same as the previous version, but we have a more accurate monarch. In this case, the accurate monarch is Sigmund III. It is a very important character in this time period. And of course, if we see here, the population has been bumped up considerably here. Over here we see Jean Carol, one of the commanders here. Beautiful portrait, and we see a more generic one here with a very small amount of troops. We have nothing in fleets and nothing in agents. Returning to Germany, we go to the Landgraviate of Hesse-Kassel. Here you can see the historical victory conditions and the world domination victory conditions. So let's have a look here at the faction of Hesse-Kassel. We see no change in income, the same thing in Protestantism. Over here we see the absolute monarchy type of government, and we see Wilhelm V. Now, I'm going to give a note here. The portrait is accurate, but eventually in this time period is going to be the father of Wilhelm V, the one that is going to be the electorate. And we're talking about the Electorate Moritz the Learned from 1592 to 1627. The population has been decreased, and in terms of military, we have a small force inside the city and no agents. Now let's go again to the Italian factions. This time we talk about the Duchy of Savoy. Eventually we see here a very accurate portrait of the Dutch, and we're going to talk about this in a few seconds. Now we see here the historical victory conditions and world domination, as I usually show you before going into the actual starting position. So let's go there. So let's go straight to Piedmont, and we see an income of 594, which is decreased slightly. Then we have an 80% of Catholicism static, which is exactly the same as the previous version. Over here we see the absolute monarchy, and we see a monarch here that is named Charles Emmanuel I. Now, evidently the name is okay for the Duchy of Savoy, but here we see the portrait of the Pope. If you remember, when we see the portrait in the actual faction selection, it was accurate, and it was this one here, which is Carlo Emanuele di Savoia. With that being said, we can see that the population has been bumped up, and we have no armies, no fleets, no agents. Very generic. Now, right now, we go straight to the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, the historical victory condition, and world domination. Feel free to pause and check them out. Let's go to Istanbul. Let's have a look at Istanbul here, and we see straight that the Turks have been decreased a little bit in income. The static Islam obviously is the same. Of course, we see a more accurate portrait of the monarch, which is the Sultan, which is going to be Osman II. We see as well the same amount of population. There has been no changes, or at least if there have been, it is very small. Of course, we have a couple of generals here. We have Abasa Mehmet Pasha, and we have as well a huge army here that is commanded by this guy, with which we can see right now a beautiful model here, and this guy is Ohrili Hussein Pasha. In terms of fleets, we have Yazid Hussein with a generic portrait. We have a couple of galleys here. With agents, we have Kismet, and we have as well here Kemal Mevlana. Now let's go to the Duchy of the Palatinate. Of course, there has been a little bit of attention here. Here we see Frederick V, which is the Winter King, on the actual image here. So let's check the victory conditions for historical and world domination. As well, we can see already a change on the flag. So let's figure out if the change has been done on the actual map. So straight we see that on the map we have basically nothing, but let's check what is happening here. We have basically the same income from the previous versions. We have now 75% of Protestantism that is going up, which is the same. And eventually here we see the portrait of Frederick V, which is the accurate monarch, absolute monarchy, but here we have the missing portrait. Population, we have 50,000 that has been decreased from the previous version, and we see nothing in lists. Now let's move to the Republic of Genoa with historical victory conditions and world domination. So here we see 100% Catholicism and the same amount of income that we got in the previous version. Over here we see a portrait of Pietro Durazo, which is actually not the actual accurate Doge. The actual Doge of Genoa in this time period is Giovanni Giacomo Tartaro. In terms of population, we see an increase in population, and then we see over here nothing in fleets, nothing in armies, nor in agents. Now we are about to reach the end of these factions and starting positions for Pike and Shot Total War. So let's go and finish with the last three. We have the Papal States with our historical victory conditions and the world domination victory conditions. So let's have a look at Rome. We have eventually a little bit less of the income that we got in the previous version. We have static 100% Catholicism, which is obvious. And over here we see the portrait of Paulus V, which is accurate name. And then we have an accurate portrait of the Pope. Eventually is a government called Absolute Monarchy. And we have the same amount of population that we got in the previous version. Here we have a normal amount of troops with a generic general. We have no fleets and no agents for the Vicar of Rome. Now approaching the end, we got the Kingdom of England. Historical victory conditions plus world domination. So let's have an inspection here in London. We got slightly less amount of income. We have 80% Protestantism that is going up, which is the same as the previous version. We got here a slight increase, but ever so slightly in population. We have a constitutional monarchy, and the monarch is James I, which is completely accurate, and the portrait is pretty awesome. Eventually here we're going to have in armies a very normal army here with the General Edward Cecil. Fleets, eventually we have William Cornwallis, which I don't think it's of the time. And then we have Charles Howard with a portrait here. An interesting agent to note is this Francis Bacon. And we have a Rake Percival Slaughter. And finally we go to the Iberian Union. So we have historical victory conditions and world domination. So let's go to Madrid. So here in Madrid, we see an income of 717, which is slightly less than the previous version. 100% Catholicism, static, eventually. Over here we see an increase in population, absolute monarchy, obviously Felipe III, which is going to be the King of Spain, and a beautiful portrait. In terms of armies, we have the great commander Ambrosio Spinola, the commander in Flanders. We have Hendrik Graf van den Berg, another commander located in Flanders. Pedro Alvarez de Toledo Osorio, which is located in northern Italy in the Italian possessions. We have, of course, fleets. We have Fadrique de Toledo with the Great Armada here. Obviously, we have new galleon models here for this type of fleet. And we have race-built galleons and a lot more. Agents, we have Guillermo Nadal and Francisco Gomez de Quevedo. So if you have reached to this point, I want to thank you. Thank you for watching. This is Factions and Starting Positions. This was Victus. See you in the next one.